Imperialism is defined as the economic and political domination of a strong nation over weaker ones. However, America and some Caribbean nations had very different ideas about imperialism. While the Caribbean had a negative perspective about imperialism, thinking that America was taking control of weaker nations only to compete with world powers in Europe, America had a more positive outlook. They thought that colonizing foreign land to compete with world powers was a good thing, and that imperialism would build a stronger navy, spread democracy, and civilize the uncivilized. One similarity between these two perspectives was that American imperialism was inspired by imperialism in Europe. In the late 1800s, several European powers were colonizing Africa. Aspiring to become a world power itself, America too jumped on this expansionist bandwagon. With this new imperialistic outlook, America acquired several new islands near the turn of the 20th century. Most of these islands were located in the Pacific Ocean, while some of them were located in the Caribbean. The similarities between the two perspectives ends here. While America had claimed that it desired these islands for naval purposes and to serve as supply stations for U.S. ships, Caribbean nations thought that the American conquest of these islands was purely a means to compete with the European powers. From their perspective, America felt threatened by these European nations and therefore had to keep up with them by acquiring new land. From an American perspective, imperialism seemed to be focused mostly in the Pacific Ocean. However, for nations in the Caribbean, America's focus seemed to be on them. This seemed to imply that, to Americans, imperialism and the conquering of these islands was second nature, something that just simply had to be done. But to these islands that were being conquered, American imperialism was much more impactful. America was claiming new land like a small child claiming toys on the playground. But these small islands were basically losing everything. So let's recap as to why America decided to become imperialistic in the first place. From the American perspective, the primary expansionist motive was to increase the power of the Navy. It also wanted to spread democracy, spread Christianity, or civilize the uncivilized, and compete with foreign powers. From the Caribbean perspective, the only expansionist motive that America had was to compete with European powers. It was so afraid of losing power to European countries that it needed to expand and build a stronger navy. So this brings us back to the original question. Was American imperialism a right or a myth? Both answers are correct, depending on which side you take. Americans thought that they were helping themselves by building a stronger navy, and helping others by spreading democracy and Christianity. Therefore, from an American perspective, imperialism was a right. But from other nations, such as those in the Caribbean, American imperialism was a myth. They saw this American expansion as an invasion into other countries, and that America was only expanding out of fear of losing power to European countries.
In the late 1700s, most people worked in the fields, on land they did not own. Those who owned the land, called aristocrats, lived refined lives in elegant manor houses. Servants raised their children and did their housework. The landowners and the people who worked for them depended upon each other. It was a system that had existed for centuries. In towns across England and the United States, a series of extraordinary innovations would alter the way people lived and worked for the next 150 years. Inventors had found new ways to harness nature's energy. They built new kinds of machines, powered by water, steam, and coal. The new machines replaced hand-powered tools. They did the same work, only cheaper and faster. Much of the work was done outside the home, in specially designed buildings, the first factories. Mechanization began in the textile mills of England, where one machine attached to a spinning wheel could do the work of 50 people. Fuel, clothing, and food all became more affordable. With the development of locomotives and steamboats, manufactured goods could now be sold halfway around the world. Families moved from the villages of their ancestors to new industrial towns. And a new class of people emerged, workers who produced goods. Industrialists, the people who owned the factories, employed hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. And they made enormous profits in their industrial centers. But while the Industrial Revolution brought wealth to some and jobs for others, it came with a price tag. Pollution from coal-powered factories turned the cities black. Lack of housing created the first urban slums. And the demand for more and more goods and higher profits brought the exploitation of workers, including children. Some of the worst conditions were seen in the textile mills of New England. In the 1830s, a 10-year-old mill girl described her life.
We were paid $2 a week, and the working hours of all the girls extended from 5 o'clock in the morning till 7 in the evening, with 1.5 hour for breakfast and for dinner.
It was the hiring of children, some as young as 5 years old, throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, that outraged the public. Workers and reformers protested. They formed unions and associations and fought for government regulations to limit the workday and protect children. These laws helped address many of the abuses brought on by the Industrial Revolution.
French colonialism in Vietnam lasted more than 80 years. Significantly, the event in 1858, France entered into Da Nang. It's the first province in Vietnam. The French invaded, especially the Paternot Treaty between France and Nguyen Dynasty on June 6, 1884 is the turning point for Nguyen Dynasty and France to take out of power. There were many revolutions between Nguyen Dynasty and France because Nguyen Dynasty divided into two groups. One group supported for France and another group is against France into Vietnam. After the event signing Paternot Treaty, the significant event in here is the Cần Vương movement. The after king by King Hàm Nghi in 1885. The elder king and court in Vietnamese Chiếu Cần Vương. Here is the king, the elder king, and the significant event for Vietnam. The policy of France on Vietnamese people. France divided Vietnam into three separate provinces: the Tonkin in the north, the An Nam in the middle of the country, and the Coco Xin China in the south of Vietnam. So the administration is totally different between the three provinces, and therefore is the reason for uprising movement of Vietnamese people at that period. For example, some movements of Vietnamese people. Either the budding uprising in Thanh Hóa province, the movement of Phan Đình Phùng leader, and also there are a lot of parallel sentences by the leader such as the Vũ Duy Tân. With the work of literature Bản án chế độ thực dân Pháp, President Ho Chi Minh mentioned into the Bản án. It is seen as the highly adjustment of Vietnamese people towards the French. This picture from the policy of France, it means exploiting the Vietnamese people by the drugs and alcohol. And that reason for Vietnamese people, that period has unemployment very increasingly.
Politically speaking, French colonialism was very hazardous, expedient, and brutal. In 1858, more than 3,000 French troops attacked Da Nang and took more power in Vietnam after that. As a result, the Nguyen Emperor signed with France Paternal Treaty in 1884, remained as figureheads, but from the late 1800s, they exercised little political power like the puppet government. The nation was divided into 3 separate parts, Tonkin in the north, An Nam along the central coast, and Cochin China in the south. Each of these parts were administered separately. There was no nation identity or authority. According to one French colonial edict, it was even illegal to use the name Vietnam. The Vietnamese people were seen slavers for both feudalism of Nguyen dynasty and colonialism of French. In addition, the Vietnamese people were put into very serious poverty in 1945 due to a large number of the non-sane taxes and bloody tax. Poisoning the native by drugs and alcohol, which led to 2 million people died in Hungary, especially the province in An Nam Tonkin such as Thái Bình, Nam Định, Thanh Hóa.
Well, generally speaking, I have to say that the negative result of French colonialism period on Vietnam is larger than positive one, and the Vietnamese people had a lot of extreme poverty and a lot of difficulties at that time. No, it's not. Why does it not? It's just part of the COVID. But I personally have to say that a lot of documents and information can prove that Vietnamese people have a lot of difficulties in poverty. Did you know that at that time the rate of the economic development was very high? I don't believe that. Can you show me? Okay, so I will show you. Okay. Actually, the rate of economic development of Vietnam at the time would dependent on the political events. For example, the movement uprising at that time lead the rate of the economic development fall down into 3% or even 1.7%. So many periods of French domination that Vietnam has the rate of economic development higher like 6 or even 8%.
From the beginning of domination, French built a series of buildings as well as infrastructure. For example, the Opera House, Hanoi Station, Presidential Palace, the Supreme People's Court, Governmental Guest House, Long Biên Bridge, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National History Museum, Hanoi Post Office. Many of them are still existing and even being used by our government. It is undeniable that the development of infrastructure has contributed greatly to change the face of Vietnam and improve the lives of Vietnamese people at that time.
And now we will go to one of the places that still existing nowadays. It is the Opera House. Actually, this building as well as the infrastructure was built for 3 main reasons. The first, they were used to enter the halls and see the institution for the French. Secondly, they were used to enter instruments to exploit the Vietnam. And thirdly, it's the way for French to build their own culture in Vietnam. In addition to the new infrastructure, France also bring into Vietnam new economic model, new science and technology. Fortunately, Vietnamese did quickly learn this knowledge and use them.
For example, the previous agriculture was only exported according to traditional methods. The French brought new equipment to promote land reclamation in a faster rate with higher productivities. However, due to France's main goal is to fulfill exploit the resources of Vietnam, they often implement policies of labor exploitation and just use some kind of technology that is really necessary so that they can cut down the cost of using mechanism. The workers in this case have to work very hard, in bad conditions, and with low wage. In other words, it can be said that Vietnam society at the time was divided into two main groups of people, the bourgeois who had poverty and production mechanism, and the proletariat who were exploited by the bourgeois.
The economic structure will experience an extremely change. The products of Vietnamese were not only sold in the small market, but also in big cities as well as the international market.
From the 19th century, the strongly development of the goods and services and the introduction of many newspapers such as Đông Dương Tạp chí, Tuần báo Nam Phong, Thực nghiệp, and so on, they lead to the increase of large number of advertisements. It can be the necessary items such as clothes, food, or the entertainment services like movies and so on. It was also easy to watch the advertising poster on the street wall or the little boy wearing advertisement called as Sandwich Man. This is the advertisement of woman magazine located in Hanoi, which style were very special. So it can be said that there was still a group of people who has a better life, and the problem is that the gap between rich and poor of Vietnam at that time were very big. What we often heard about that time is the life of poor people.
My uncles and aunts were born in war. They have to study French. They lived in French buildings. They walked around Hoàng Kim Lake. They saw the Total Tower and made up in front of Ngọc Sơn Temple every day. There are many constructions made by the French in the colonial period, and they stayed until the recent days. Hanoi Opera House is an example. I was first taken to the Hanoi Opera House before I entered primary school. The building surprised me by its tall gates, large lobby, thick wall, and so many chairs for hundreds of people. It was totally amazing for a 5-year-old girl. After realizing that the opera house was built by the French, I came up with one question. Why did the French need an opera house on the battlefield, but they were supposed to fight and to kill Vietnamese instead of listening to music in Hanoi? The history courses finally gave me the answer. Being a university student gave me another chance to view my favorite place from the angle of history. Hanoi Opera House was the first and the biggest building that the French constructed in Indochina. The French wanted to assimilate not only Vietnamese to French, but also Indochina to France, and they wanted to turn Hanoi into the second Paris. Hanoi Opera House has the same architecture style compared to the Palais Garnier, or often called the Paris Opera House. If the Museum of Vietnam History nearby was painted and decorated with elements of Vietnam's traditional architecture style, the Hanoi Opera House was constructed absolutely modern, following French style. The Opéra de Paris was built in the 19th century. The Hanoi Opera House was built in the 20th centuries. It was smaller, less sophisticated, but carried many structural features that adapted from the Paris Opera House. By building this opera house in Hanoi, the French colonialism left a message to both Vietnamese and French. To the Vietnamese, they reaffirmed that there was no more Hanoi but the second Paris. The French came and stayed here forever, bringing their French architecture, language, music, and culture. And to the French soldier, the French government warmly welcomed and assured that the motherland would be with you whenever you were. It was not Vietnam, it was our land. Hanoi Opera House was the evidence of assimilation policy that the French applied in Vietnam. The assimilation policy was intended to extinguish the national spirit and the will to fight of Vietnamese. Besides changing the education system, using French in schools, altering the economic institution, replacing traditional authority by colonial administration, the French also built a lot of construction carrying the neoclassical architecture style, and the Hanoi Opera House is the historical evidence. Hanoi Opera House is clearly another smaller version of Paris Opera House. This construction carried the ambition of the colonialists. They wanted to use modern construction to empower the French soldiers' spirits, to make them feel like home and make Hanoi the second Paris. In the recent years, Hanoi Opera House is loved by Vietnamese and foreign tourists. Many French constructions in Hanoi like the Hanoi Opera House, the Museum of Vietnam History, Hoa Lo Prisons, Long Biên Bridge, St. Paul Hospital, Juvenile High School are still remain and stay protected by the Vietnamese local. We detest colonialism. We hate the loss and the pain brought here by the French colonialists under the mission of civilize. However, we love the value of art, and those constructions now become the precious historical place. It helps us to tell the story of brave Vietnamese who fight and stop the idea of civilized and turn Vietnamese into Frenchmen. It proves the differences between two flows of cultures. If the French didn't conquer our land, we have never ever had the Long Biên Bridge, the Hanoi Opera House, as well as many other historical places.